For years, a single red line was drawn across the battlefield, a line of fear. Terrified of a global war, the West kept Ukraine's most powerful weapons on a tight leash, forbidding strikes deep inside Russian territory. But that red line hasn't just been blurred, it has been systematically erased. What started as a secret, hesitant nod for cross-border self-defense has now become a green light for deep strikes. The West has quietly handed Ukraine the keys to a new kind of war. One fought not just on Ukraine's blood-soaked soil, but in the skies and on the ground of Russia itself. This is the story of a monumental gamble, a clandestine shift that has unleashed Ukraine's most dangerous capabilities, risking everything for what could be a final decisive checkmate. Or the world's most catastrophic mistake, the doctrine of fear and the sanctuary state. To understand just how big of a deal this is, we have to go back. For the first 2 years of this brutal conflict, a core principle governed all Western military aid. Ukrainian hands could fire Western weapons, but those weapons could not land on sovereign Russian territory. This created a bizarre, one-sided war. Russia could gather its troops, its artillery, its logistics hubs, and its air power just across the border, in places like Belgorod and Kursk, and use this territory as a completely safe and untouchable sanctuary. From this safe zone, it launched devastating attacks on Ukrainian cities like Kharkiv, knowing that Ukraine's best weapons were effectively handicapped. This wasn't just a tactical choice, it was a doctrine born of deep-seated fear. The fear of escalation. President Vladimir Putin had repeatedly warned of serious consequences if Western weapons were used to strike the Russian motherland, hinting at everything from a wider conventional war to the unthinkable, nuclear weapons. For leaders in Washington and Berlin, the risk of a direct NATO-Russia conflict, a true World War III scenario, was a line they refused to cross. This meant Ukraine was forced to fight with one hand tied behind its back. Imagine defending your home, but being told you can only fight the intruders once they're inside your living room, never while they're gathering on your front lawn. That was the reality for Ukraine. This policy created a sanctuary for Russia, allowing it to wage war with an impunity that was both strategically absurd and morally galling. Russia could bomb Ukrainian civilian centers from airfields deep within its own borders, knowing those same airfields were off-limits to retaliation. The Kremlin, safe behind this Western-imposed red line, operated as if its own territory was immune. But as the war dragged on, two things began to change this equation: Ukraine's own ingenuity and Russia's relentless brutality. The red line blurs, drones, HIMARS, and a policy in tatters. The first cracks in the sanctuary doctrine didn't come from a Western policy document. They came from Ukraine itself. Unable to use Western arms for deep strikes, Kiev did what it has done throughout this war. It innovated. Ukraine ramped up production of its own long-range drones, creating a domestic arsenal capable of reaching targets hundreds, and eventually over 1,000 kilometers inside Russia. This indigenous drone campaign began to methodically dismantle the idea of a Russian sanctuary. Oil refineries, fuel depots, and military logistics hubs suddenly found themselves on the front line. This was a game changer. For the first time, the war was being brought home to Russia in a tangible way. What was once a distant special military operation, for many Russians, was now a conflict causing visible disruption. But these drones, while effective, were just the beginning. The real policy shift started gaining momentum in mid-2024. Faced with a ferocious Russian offensive against Kharkiv, which was being shelled mercilessly from just across the border, the White House finally flinched. In May 2024, President Biden gave a limited, almost whispered authorization for Ukraine to use some U.S.-supplied weapons, like the highly mobile HIMARS rocket systems, for counterfire purposes in the Kharkiv region. The idea was simple self-defense. If you're being shot at from across the border, you should be able to shoot back. This was the first official, albeit limited, tear in the fabric of the old policy. The sanctuary was no longer absolute. Yet, even this permission was heavily restricted and explicitly prohibited the use of longer-range missiles like the Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS, for strikes inside Russia. But a door had been opened, and over the next year it would be blown wide open. The green light gets brighter. The final decisive shift came not with a single public proclamation, but through a series of quiet approvals and pointed statements in late 2024 and into 2025. The catalyst was a grim combination of factors: Russia's brutal, ongoing missile assaults on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and credible reports that North Korea was sending thousands of troops to fight for Russia. The West realized its policy of restraint was failing to deter escalation from Moscow. It was merely hindering Ukraine's ability to defend itself. In May of 2025, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that key allies, including the US, UK, France, and Germany, had lifted restrictions, giving Ukraine the right to defend itself by striking military sites inside Russia. While the White House has remained more ambiguous about its longest-range missiles, the practical effects were clear. The leash was off. Reports in late October 2025 confirmed that the U.S. had quietly shifted its policy to allow strikes with some Western long-range missiles, like the Storm Shadow, by delegating approval authority to military commanders in Europe. While a formal green light for U.S. made ATACMS to strike deep inside Russia remains a closely guarded and debated topic, the message to Moscow was unmistakable. Ukraine was now empowered to systematically degrade Russia's ability to wage war from anywhere within reach. This shift wasn't just an American decision, but part of a broader consensus. The West had collectively decided that the risk of Ukrainian defeat was now greater than the risk of Russian escalation. The symphony of destruction and the Russian response. With the shackles loosened, Ukraine has unleashed a strategic campaign aimed at the heart of Russia's war economy. The results in 2025 have been staggering. The head of Ukraine's security service, SBU, stated that as of late October 2025, Ukrainian forces had carried out nearly 160 successful strikes against Russian oil facilities this year alone. Another analysis confirmed that Ukrainian drones have struck at least 16 of Russia's 38 large oil refineries since August 2025. Targets have been hit from near the border to deep inside Russia, with drones reaching over 1,100 kilometers to hit critical energy infrastructure. This campaign is anything but random. Analysts point to a twin target strategy, hitting large refineries that are crucial for Russia's economy and fuel exports, and simultaneously targeting plants closer to the front that supply fuel directly to the military. The economic impact is undeniable. The campaign has caused real-world fuel shortages in some Russian regions, disrupted logistics, and forced Moscow to ban gasoline exports. One recent drone attack in early November 2025 on the massive Lukoil refinery in Volgograd, which accounts for about 5% of Russia's total refining capacity, reportedly forced it to suspend operations. So, what does this all mean on the battlefield? It means Russia's logistical tail is being set on fire. It forces Moscow to divert precious air defense systems away from the front lines to protect its own industrial heartland. This is the strategic leverage Ukraine has been seeking for years. Russia's response has been a mix of furious rhetoric and brutal but predictable retaliation. The Kremlin has called the strikes a qualitatively new phase of the Western war against Russia, vowing to react accordingly. In practice, this has meant intensified missile and drone barrages against Ukrainian cities and critical infrastructure. It's a tactic Russia has employed throughout the war, routinely launching massive strikes following Ukrainian successes to try and break the will of the Ukrainian people. The high-stakes gamble: checkmate or global catastrophe? This brings us to the ultimate question. Is this policy shift a brilliant strategic move that could finally give Ukraine the upper hand? Or is it a reckless gamble that could spiral out of control? The argument for it being a game-changer is compelling. Ukraine's ability to strike Russian territory provides critical leverage. By disrupting the economy and affecting daily life for some Russians, these strikes could force Putin to divert massive resources to defense, weakening his offensive capabilities. It takes the war out of the abstract and places the consequences directly at Moscow's doorstep. It allows Ukraine to destroy Russian military forces before they are committed to combat, a crucial advantage for a nation fighting for its survival. However, the risk of a catastrophic escalation remains terrifyingly real. For years, the core fear has been a direct conflict between Russia and NATO, and this policy pushes the world closer to that precipice than ever before. Vladimir Putin has repeatedly threatened to use his own advanced long-range missiles, or even tactical nuclear weapons, in response to what he deems an existential threat. While many analysts believe these threats are largely a bluff designed to deter Western support, the danger is that Putin may one day feel cornered enough to act on them. He could decide to provide advanced weapons to anti-Western states to strike Western targets in return, widening the conflict globally. Each successful drone strike on Russian soil is a roll of the dice, betting that Putin's red lines are just rhetoric. So far, that bet has paid off. But with each roll, the stakes get higher. We have entered a new and profoundly dangerous chapter of the Russo-Ukrainian War. The old rules are gone. The Western-imposed sanctuary that protected the Russian Federation for years has been dismantled, piece by piece. First by Ukraine's own homegrown drones, and now, decisively, by the loosening of restrictions on some of the West's most powerful conventional weapons. This was not a single sudden decision, but a gradual, calculated erosion of restraint, born from the grim realization that a strategy of pure defense was leading Ukraine toward a slow, grinding defeat. Ukraine is now empowered to wage a more symmetrical war, to inflict pain not just on invading soldiers, but on the economic and logistical apparatus that sustains the entire invasion. This is the ultimate high-stakes gamble. It is a move that could cripple Russia's war machine and force it to the negotiating table. Or it could be the trigger for the wider, more devastating war the world has feared since February 24th, 2022. The world is watching, and the next moves from Kiev and Moscow could determine the future of European security for generations to come. This new phase of the war is incredibly dynamic, with the strategic map changing by the day. If you want to stay on top of these developments and understand what they mean for the future of the conflict, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell.